Hey everybody, how are you all doing? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review. Welcome back to the channel, and today I want to discuss what will happen if Nintendo's 2021 turns out to be another slow and fairly disappointing year, at least in the eyes of some. Now, this topic today is definitely a little bit of a spin on some prior topics that we've talked about here. Both myself here on Rule of Two Review and other YouTubers and people have kind of discussed this concept about how amazing we expect 2021 to be, or maybe it's not going to be as amazing as we thought for so many different reasons. Obviously, the pandemic situation would be one of them. But if I'm being honest, there really isn't a lot of super exciting news or events or big things happening to really give me something to talk about. And this is something I've been thinking about. I think that there is more of a conversation to have to maybe explore the other side of this debate. And that's what I wanted to do today, discuss the other side of this. Yes, I think the year could be fantastic, but what happens if it's not? Of course, before I dive into this topic, I do want to remind you that I am currently pushing to cross 15,000 subscribers on Rule of Two Review. I am oh so close. I am less than 100 away. It feels great to see. I'm really excited to hit this goal. So as you watch this video, if you like what I'm doing and you like what you hear, then consider subscribing to the channel to help me cross that milestone very soon. So here's the thing I want to say before we get too much deeper into this, and it's something that you've heard me say. I do expect for Nintendo's year, this year in 2021, to be incredibly strong. And I know a lot of us already feel that. We were talking about that even as early as just last fall in 2020, when the year was getting ready to come to a close. And we saw how slow and strange and quiet Nintendo was for most of 2020. There were some exceptions, but for the most part, low on announcements, low on brand new games, low on Nintendo Directs. And because of that, a lot of people started to talk about, oh, I bet a bunch of the 2020 titles that we were waiting for got shoved into 2021. So 2021 is going to be more stacked than it already was going to be. It's going to be crazy. And I discussed right at the end of the year some of my predictions for this year for Nintendo. And yes, I absolutely expect it to be a pretty banger year. But here's the thing. Just because I and many of you expect 2021 to be a banger year for Nintendo and the Switch, that doesn't mean that we're right. That doesn't mean that it's going to happen. And so I think it's important and responsible, at least for myself as a YouTuber who covers mostly Nintendo, to add to the conversation the concept of what happens if it turns out to be a slow year. So I think there are three main categories of things that could help make Nintendo's year either really great or maybe not so great. Three things that we could be looking forward to. One, first and most important, obviously, is just games. We want games. We want a lot of games. We want hopefully new games, not just ports or remasters. We want new entries in titles and franchises we haven't heard from in a long time. We want maybe some new IPs, exclusive stuff, first party, third party. Just games, man. Just give us the games. 2020 was low on games for the Switch. We want 21 to be overflowing with games for the Switch. The next thing, of course, is Nintendo Directs, which I've talked about several times, including my last video was about Nintendo Directs. And obviously, part of that conversation is whether or not Nintendo is planning to even continue doing Nintendo Directs. I certainly believe they will bring them back this year, but there's a chance that they don't. And if they don't, then that could be something that maybe impacts the way a lot of people feel about Nintendo's 2021. And then the last thing, the third thing that I want to bring up and kind of touch on this video is, I'm sorry you guys, I've got to say this, a possible Nintendo Switch Pro. So here's the thing on the Switch Pro thing, you guys. I'll go ahead and start with this and make this the first sort of focus here. I'm talking about it solely because it's an option that might happen, and it's something that a lot of people are paying attention to and asking for and expecting. And at this point, it's like I've exhausted myself talking about my theories and my thoughts on the concept of a Switch Pro, whether it was going to be last year or whether it's even this year. I obviously don't need a Switch Pro. I'm very happy and satisfied with the current Switch. I also feel, and again, I know you guys have heard me say this many times, but I have to repeat it for anyone who stumbles upon this as a new video. I honestly just feel like the next-gen Nintendo console is sooner than later. I really think 22 or 23, we're going to see that machine. And that is going to make the concept of the Switch, or even an updated Switch Pro that everyone would spend another $300 on, that much more obsolete. What would be the point of releasing a Switch Pro this year for another $300 that so many of us would end up spending our money on, even though we have a regular Switch, just for next year or 18 months from now? All of a sudden, here's the next-gen console, and now everything Switch, whether it's base Switch or Switch Pro, is now obsolete. It's old tech. Our future going forward for the next 5 to 7 or 8 years is this Switch 2 or whatever it is. If that happens, the Switch Pro becomes just a big waste of time and a big waste of everyone's money. Of course, that's only based on my personal theory that the next-gen console is coming next year or the year after. Obviously, I could be wrong, and if I am wrong, and we're several years out from that, then a Switch Pro obviously does make more sense, and it wouldn't be a waste of everyone's time and money. Part of my feelings on the Switch Pro also is a result of last year, because, you know, I've been on what I've called in the past a roller coaster of thoughts and feelings about the Switch Pro, because I didn't believe in a Switch Mini, and the Switch Mini turned out to be real. I didn't believe in the Switch Pro, then I did start to believe in a Switch Pro for all these different reasons in late 2019 and early 2020, and then I started to believe less and less in a Switch Pro. I even suspect that maybe a Switch Pro or updated Switch was supposed to launch in 2020, but because of the pandemic changing everything and manufacturing in China and all this stuff, maybe Nintendo either scrapped it outright or delayed the release of it until this year in 2021. I mean, these are all certainly things that could have happened. Then, of course, there's the other concept I've discussed in the past, where maybe the Switch Pro is not meant to be a Pro that actually updates the significant power and graphics of the Switch. Maybe what this is really just a slight SKU upgrade, the same way the battery life SKU replaced the old SKU last year. And maybe this is going to be just a couple of slight tweaks to the overall design and performance of the Switch, but it's not a significant upgrade. But that information maybe got into the wrong hands behind the scenes, and people have turned it into this bigger idea of a Switch Pro. So there's just a lot of stuff going on with the concept of a Switch Pro, and it's hard for me to know what I even expect anymore. And so that's where I just try to make it as simple as can be, and I'm like, you know what? I'm just 50-50 on it. I don't need one personally, but if one existed and it looks cool, yes, I would want it and I would buy it. Do I think Nintendo's going to do it? Maybe, maybe not, but I'm open to it. I do think it is possible. I'm not telling you I absolutely believe it. I'm not telling you behind the scenes stuff I've heard that makes you feel one way or another. I'm just telling you I'm open to believing that Nintendo is considering it or planning it. And if they are, I feel like 2021 would have to be the very last year that they could feasibly release it and have it have a significant amount of time on the shelf before that next-gen console launches. So it's really tricky. If a Switch Pro comes out in 2021, it's going to be a huge deal. It's going to get people very excited. It's going to be massive news. All eyes will be on the Switch Pro, especially coming off of recent launches of the next gen from Sony and from Microsoft. You know, we've got PS5 and Series X on the market now. So any new hardware from Nintendo, a Switch Pro or a next gen machine, is going to get major attention, and it's going to be compared directly to the PS5 and Series X. If we don't get the Switch Pro, I won't personally be affected because I'm satisfied with the current Switch and I'm ready for games we know are already coming to it, like Breath of the Wild 2 and Metroid Prime 4. But I do think a lot of people might feel disappointed and let down, either because they've drank the Kool-Aid and they've bought in completely, or because they don't like the current Switch and they feel that they need more power to even enjoy it in the first place. As far as Nintendo Directs go, I don't know that I need to spend too much time on it, simply because I discussed it in a video 2 months ago, and I discussed it also just this past week, how I personally believe that Nintendo Directs are coming back this year. And so if they come back this year, I think that's going to do wonders to make the year feel like a better, stronger, more full year. But if I'm wrong and Nintendo Directs are not happening and not coming back in 2021, yeah, that's going to probably hurt the way the year feels for a lot of people. Maybe they make up for it by just going ham on Twitter and YouTube announcements, and they're throwing tons of trailers for big and exciting games. I'm not talking about random little one-off indie games that really no one pays attention to. And I'm not trying to make a commentary on the quality of the games. I'm just saying the announcements aren't big, so no one pays attention to most of those trailers that just pop up. But if they pull, you know, a Paper Mario and a Hyrule Warriors kind of announcement 5, 6, 8, 10 times in 2021, that will do a lot to make up for the lack of Nintendo Directs. But if we go the full year with no Directs, I gotta be honest with you guys, I think it's gonna hurt. I think we're all gonna feel that missing void in our heart of no Directs. I think it'll feel like we're missing the normal communication and messaging and spirit of Nintendo by not having them throughout the year, because that's part of what makes Nintendo special is we constantly are hearing from them and getting their messaging and seeing their music and their logos and their graphics and these things that are just kind of part of the overall sort of brand of Nintendo. And when we get that, 4, 5, 6 times a year, it feels like Nintendo is ever present. If that goes away completely, it's going to feel like something is missing, and I think that could make it a little bit of a downer year for a lot of people. Then, of course, there's the games. Like I said, right, the biggest and most important thing, what's going on with games? Are we going to get Bayonetta 3 finally? Maybe, maybe not. We know the first quarter is doing pretty well. I made a video about it, We're getting Bravely Default 2, and we're giving Mario 3D World. We've now seen the Bowser's Fury, which looks surprisingly very cool. We're getting a couple of things in the first quarter. Monster Hunter Rise is going to be a massive third-party game, just a massive, massive game. So we know first quarter is decent. It's got a first-party port, and it's got 3 big third-party games coming out that we know of. But what about later in the year? Bayonetta 3 would be something really sad for us not to get. Breath of the Wild 2, I think, is obviously the big one. Are we seeing that this year or not? I tend to think so, but we might not, simply because we just don't know. I can't possibly envision a world where Breath of the Wild 2 does not release in 2021, but until Nintendo confirms it, we have to wonder, and we can only speculate that maybe it won't release this year. What about Metroid news, a brand new Mario, a Pikmin, an F-Zero, a Xenoblade, things like this? If we get these games this year, it's going to feel like a great year, and it's what most of us expect. But if Nintendo isn't ready for some of these big games to come, and we don't hear from Metroid or Zelda or Mario or any surprise F-Zero or a new Fire Emblem or any of that stuff, and it's another year that has like 2 or 3 fairly high quality Nintendo games, I think that will also hurt, and it'll feel like a repeat of 2020. And again, most people feel like 2020 was a slow downer year, even if we understand it, because that's certainly me. I feel like 2020 was a slow, unexciting year for Nintendo, but I understand it because of the unique situation, so it's like, it is what it is. I kind of just am willing to accept it and move on. But if we get that again this year, and I know the pandemic is still continuing, so there's a tiny bit of an excuse there, but it also feels like most companies, Nintendo included, have probably gotten themselves back to close to full operating capacity, even within the pandemic, because it's been a year at this point. And so if this year just becomes a repeat in terms of slowness, it's going to hurt, and I think that most people will feel like it's another disappointing Nintendo year. And so ultimately, where would we be left if that happens? What actually happens if it's another slow year from Nintendo? Well, I'll tell you, one thing I don't know that I expect would be for sales to slow down. I think that Nintendo has shown that even in the face of the strongest adversity, in the Switch era specifically, that Nintendo can still maintain success. Because even if it's a slow year, I think they will still get 1 or 2 significant titles out. And honestly, if Breath of the Wild 2 is one of those titles, let's say Nintendo releases 3 first-party games on the Switch all year, which would be slow for them. If Breath of the Wild 2 is one of them, that is going to be massive sales for that title, and it is going to be more massive sales for the Switch. We have to remember the Switch is still technically kind of harder to find. It was hard to find all year in 2020 due to pandemic slowing manufacturing and due to Animal Crossing being so successful. And it's still a pretty hot item. And that's going to carry on for the first several months of the year. There's even a chance it carries on throughout the entire year, even if Nintendo isn't releasing new exciting games. And if we can throw something huge, like just a Breath of the Wild 2 on top of that, Nintendo will probably still continue to sell and make money. And if that happens, no matter how sad or disappointed we might be by not having a lot of games to play, Nintendo will be doing just fine, which means the company will be having more money to put into resources of future products. Obviously, the other thing that could happen if it's a slow year is consumer faith could be shaken. Even if people continue to buy the Switch, people still might feel like Nintendo is leaving them high and dry, and Nintendo is ignoring them, or Nintendo might not be putting forth the effort to keep us busy with exciting new games. And whether or not that would be true, that's going to be up into the individual. I'm not telling you that that's how you should feel. I'm just predicting that that's how people and a lot of folks in the community might react and how they might feel. And consumer confidence and the strength of your brand is important. That's part of the business side of this whole thing. And if that starts to get shaken with 2 slow years in a row, pandemic or not, I think that that could potentially do some damage to Nintendo's overall image, you know, at least in the here and now until they were to start to make up for it with newer projects. Also, I think it's worth noting that, last point here, if 21 is slow again like 20 was, I think that that might further aid into my personal theory about the next-gen Nintendo console being right around the corner. Because if they have just a massive crap ton of games to release this year, maybe even a Switch Pro, whatever, and we're getting Nintendo Directs and games and new hardware out the wazoo, that means that they might be confident still letting the Switch continue to ride itself out for a long time. But if it becomes slow again, I think that, you know, whereas in 2020 it was slow, not by design from Nintendo, in 2021, if it stays slow, I think it would be a very purposeful by design decision by the company. And the reason I think that would be the case would be because they know they've got to start prepping for the launch of that next console. For the time that they finally reveal it to us, all the hype and marketing around the reveal and the promotion, and then when that thing finally launches, they're going to need a bunch of games. It could remind me of how the last year or two of the Wii U played out. And I know the Wii U is different because it was a sales failure, and I get that. But I also think that if the Switch slows down in 2021, it might be reminiscent of the Wii U situation regardless. Because the Wii U's last year was so barren with games because it was time to move on to the next thing. If we get 2 slow years of the Switch in a row, I think it might be because a lot of projects are moving to the next console. Nintendo knows Switch 2 is coming in November 22 or, you know, March 23. And so we don't have time to release all these new games at Donkey Kong, Fire Emblem, Mario Kart, whatever. We got to start moving these things, Metroid Prime 4, over to this new console. And so if that happens, again, this is all just a big if. We're just talking and speculating just for the sake of conversation and to explore the other side of the discussion here. If this happens, I'm not saying it's a lock, but I think it would make me feel even better about my prediction that the next-gen Nintendo console could be releasing pretty close. And so at the end of the day, these are just some of my thoughts and ideas about what could happen. You know, I've talked a lot about how I think Nintendo is going to have a great year in 2021, and it's ultimately how I feel. It's definitely the feeling and the sentiment I want to leave you guys with, and I wanted to also bring it up at the beginning of the video as well. But just because we feel a way doesn't mean that that's what's going to happen. There is a chance that it goes the opposite way that we're expecting, and if that happens, I want to be prepared for it. I wanted to discuss it, kind of talk through my own feelings about it, and then also share it with you guys to maybe put some ideas in your heads so that a lot of us might not be as caught off guard if that happens. But man, I don't know, Q1 is so strong. I feel like the rest of the year is going to be the same. I know we're going to be playing Breath of the Wild 2 this year. We're getting No More Heroes 3 already, which is huge for me. I feel really good that Bayonetta 3 is coming. We're going to get a surprise Mario or a Fire Emblem or something else, you know, a Metroid game. I know we're getting stuff this year. I just know it. It's going to be a great year. So either way, these are my thoughts about what happens if it is another slow year, and I want to hear what you think about my breakdown, and I want to hear your own thoughts and predictions about how you think 2021 might shape out for Nintendo and the Switch. And with that being said, this video is a wrap. Of course, don't forget, trying to cross 15,000 subscribers, so if you like what I'm doing here, then consider subscribing to the channel because I am right about there. And with that, this video is a wrap. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in, guys. This is Rob over Look to Review, and I'll catch you next time on another video.